Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Af Malhotra on Straight Talk with Af. My guest today is an acclaimed author, a disruptive thinker, someone who's executing on doing DEI well, making a real change in business, in society. She has not only done the startup piece really well, she has a ton of life experience, a lot of pain, a lot of trauma, a lot of personal stories. And she has ventured into this entire world of the business community and trying to figure out how global organizations can actually get DEI working. Her organization, Aerodei, which she will talk about in a moment, has been a game changer in the way organizations are now driving inclusivity in their organization. It's a really, really hard thing to do. And I don't think anyone's really, got the billion-dollar solution. But I have to tell you, my guest today is very, very close. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the wonderful Netta Jenkins on the show, CEO of Aerodei. Netta, what a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm excited.
I am too. We had a wonderful conversation going back about a month or so about this superb journey that you've been on, right from childhood, actually,
Yeah.
which is probably the most important part of this conversation right now, into this world of innovation where you've built this company, which we will talk about momentarily. And along the journey, you decided to just last year write a fantastic book, The Inclusive Organization. And it's not just a fantastic book because I'm saying it, but Forbes is saying it. And they're a pretty good authority. And you're one of the top 4 books in DEI that Forbes has suggested that people read. So go and buy the book, and we'll talk more about the book and where people can get it from and so on and so forth. So without further ado, tell us about Netta. Who are you? Your journey, right the way as young as you want to go, you
Yeah.
know, to how you got to a point where you decided that you're going to campaign for your business and for uh, racial rights, human rights, and for DEI. So that I'd love to just probe there, and then we'll move on to another chapter in a second.
Yeah, I love that. So I'll start with, both of my parents are from Liberia. They moved to the United States in the 80s. And then they moved to a very small town, which was predominantly white. And we faced an extreme amount of racism, very overt. In fact, when I was 7 years old, and I always share this story, a white woman had stormed in our yard and she proclaimed blacks don't belong in my neighborhood and then proceeded to spit in my mom's face. And I remember at the age of 7 years old, literally watching the phlegm drip down my mother's cheek and also feeling my mom's energy. My mom thinking, what do I do in this moment? Do I react? We all know what that reaction could look like.
Mm, mm,
Or do I just turn around and walk away? Because there's so many other things that if she does react, then what happens to her, right? She's no longer the victim. And so she decided to turn around, hold my hand, and we walked back in the house. And I remember kind of my world just shattering at that moment. We didn't unpack it, but I went back in my room and I vowed to never be silent again. Because in that moment, and although I was only 7 years old, and some would argue, but you're so young,
mm.
you're still trying to process what's happening. The fact of the matter is, I didn't say anything. I was in total shock and disbelief. And I never wanted to be in that position again. And what I love about having African immigrant parents is that they definitely stressed the importance of education. They stressed the importance of not making myself feel small, right?
Right,
Always
right.
making sure that I believed in the goals and the things that I wanted to fulfill and not have anyone shut that down. And so I went off and I get into to school and I remember I was in middle school and I said, you know what? I'm going to run for the president of the freshman class because I was heading off to high school.
Yeah.
I ended up winning, and I remember my student council teacher saying, well, Netta, your big gig here is to fold flowers for the freshman float. And I looked at him and I said, I'm not here to fold flowers for the freshman float. I am here to create change. And he laughed because who says that, right? A young person,
Yeah.
you're here to really create change. And at that point, I guess I really did think I was Martin Luther King, but I really wanted to create change because I went to a predominantly white school. I remember the feeling of being the only or one of the few,
Mm.
the looks, the things that people said. And I really, really wanted to, I was yearning to educate people. I was even yearning to educate the teachers that were teaching.
Mm.
So I enrolled in honors classes as well. And I sat and I remember the first time I actually worked up the courage to say something. And I was in Afro Asian class. And I forget what the teacher was saying, but he was saying something that was inaccurate.
Mm.
And I paused and I said, well, that's not true. And I started to, share my point and I watched students kind of listen to me and wanting to learn a little bit more. And now there was interaction between me and the teacher wanting to
Mm.
learn a bit more.
Mm.
And that's when I knew, okay, you have the power to educate. Don't you hold back. It is okay, right? And so then I go off to college. And of course, before getting into college, I thought I was going to be an attorney. That's my father wanted me to be an attorney. He said, "You're going to be better than Johnny Cochran." And I remember thinking, like, "Oh, okay, all right, we'll see about that."
Yeah.
And my mom, just from watching me rub my grandmother's back with Bengay, thought I was going to be a top surgeon. I needed to say, I'm not either of them, right? So they definitely were inspirations and
Yeah.
empowerment in my life, of course. But I go on to college and I see the same types of barriers exist within a predominantly white university. And then I get into corporate America and I see more, even more. And I'm like, wait, hold on, this is still happening?
Mm.
What's going on? And that's what really led me into this work because I knew that at a very young age, I had developed the power to speak up. And there is actual power to that because it's a very, very hard thing to do, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Because when you do speak up, you risk. You put a lot of things to risk, right? You put your job at risk, which help you pay your bills and
Right.
sustain in life. You put friendships in risk,
Mhm.
right? You put so much on the table. But for me, advocating for people that were voiceless, that felt or were oppressed, especially within the workplace, when you really need your job to survive, it
Mm.
was crucial for me to advocate for people. And really, that's when the journey of um, me really being just intrigued by diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what that meant as it pertains to the workplace that was ignited.
Mm. Can I go back a little bit if that's
Yeah,
okay? So,
please,
did
please
you have any
do.
siblings? Are you the only child? Or do you have siblings?
Yeah, I do. I have an older sister, and I have two younger brothers.
And did you find with your older sister first, she was of the same ilk? Did she have the same sort of makeup and zeal and drive to create change, or was it something different there?
Yeah, she definitely had the drive to create change, but I think a part of her was like, but I'm tired, right? Like not everyone wants to take that on. So my older sister actually, she's in finance. She's in the finance world. But I think for her, I think deep down inside, yeah, she's always wanted to create change, but it was just a matter of, at this stage of my life, I want to protect my peace. And some people make that decision to kind of protect their peace because when you are advocating for people that are voiceless or oppressed, um, you're not really protecting your peace. There's a lot that you come up against.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah.
And your two brothers, have they been involved in what you're doing, or are they doing something
Yeah.
else?
Yeah. So all of my siblings, I will say, definitely support me 100% because they
Yeah.
know how important this work is. My brother, he works for the school department. And my other little brother, he's in marketing and the event space and the entertainment world. Um, so they're on, I think all of my siblings are on different paths. But where we meet is around how can we create change within the roles that we're in? I think the perception, the misconception is that you must have a DEI title or you must have done this work for a very long time in order to advocate for other people. And that's not necessarily true. You
Mm,
can be in any role, right? You could be working at McDonald's at the cashier register,
mm,
and you can still create change and impact people's lives that you connect with.
mm,
So we all play a role in that. We just have to find the space in which we do.
mm. When you think about your shift to the corporate world, because this is now interesting, the education, the early education teaches you some important lessons, right, in the playground, doesn't it? And
Mm.
apart from the normal lessons of a young person growing up at school, the playground's brutal. It's a
Yeah.
brutal arena, right? And I'm not sure if it's got any better or worse. I can't comment on that at this point, but at least when I was at school, and I'm sure when you were at school, it's a brutal arena. And then when you're different to the majority population, it gets a little bit more brutal, right?
Absolutely.
So, and then your parents tell you to sort of, you know, swallow it and just, dust yourself off and build strength and character. That's usually something. Come on, you've got to build some resilience. Come on, this is life. This is what it's going to be. You've got to be tough, thick-skinned. I remember is a term I used to hear quite a lot. And then one does that, and your skin gets thicker and thicker and thicker, and you sort of brush stuff off. You're like, yeah, whatever, whatever, whatever. Shrug your shoulders, and then you come into the corporate world where I guess for you, you had designation, you had some power, you had um, some level of authority in the positions you were in, and you started to observe. What did you actually observe? Because you touched on it, but if I may, what did you observe?
Yeah. I had observed, so when I had started off, I was also in recruiting. And I remember, interacting with other recruiters and hearing them conduct interviews, watching how they screened resumes. If there were names that they could not pronounce, it
Right.
was, ooh, that needs to go to that side. And I would pull that resume back and say, but hold on, this person has the experience that we're looking for. Just because you can't articulate the name, that shouldn't be placed to the side, right? So I started to see things like that. Of course, I also started to see managers heavily focus on only the Ivy League
Mm-hmm.
universities, and I had to also speak on that and say, okay, well, there are other people in the world that may have not attended Ivy League universities, and that's okay, right? Let's look at those resumes as well. Let's not throw them to the side. um, I started to see the microaggressions, and those are daily slights that people would experience or that they would share with me, right? Folks started to open up with me, especially from underrepresented groups in sharing, hey, here's what I'm experiencing, right? I got talked over today. I was not placed on this email, and I'm the one who's leading the project.
Mm-hmm.
So there were so many things that were popping up. And then I think the biggest thing that I started to see was, gosh darn it, the lack of representation, right? Why is there such a lack of representation of women? Heck, just women. If we just focused on gender,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we didn't even touch on race, just women. There are many women in the world. Um, and so that for me was an eye opener because there were not many in executive level positions. There were not many in the engineering, departments or leading the charge. And so that I wanted to address as well. Of course, I started to look at the intersectionalities. I
Mm-hmm.
started to look at race. I started to look at the ethnicity. I started to look at, hey, who are the amount of how many caregivers are here? What are some of the policies? What are the programs in place for people to actually want to come here and do well? Right? Because it's a hit to your productivity level if you're not ignited and excited to be a part of an organization. An organization does not grow in that way. And so those were all points that I started to bring to the surface.
Mm.
And for me, I really wanted to be very strategic about it. My background is in communications and behavioral psychology. So for me, it was I can bring up these points, but I need to make sure that I have a relationship with these leaders first. When you build a relationship with someone, a trusting relationship, now they're more open to hear, okay, here are the things that are not going so well. I know that Netta is coming in with good intent for everyone here. So I'm going to listen. I don't see it work out for leaders when they say, okay, they demand, here's what needs to happen. And it's like, well, that person doesn't even know, there's no relationship. And so now it's just going to be transactional. And you're
Right.
going to get frustrated and you're going to walk out. So I was always very intentional about building that relationship first. And that really helped me to bring to surface these things that were happening for those leaders to believe it, because that's a whole nother barrier, right? You bring
Right.
it, now that person has to believe it to then have the courage to say, we need to take action on it and we need your help to solution this.
Yeah.
We haven't been doing it the right way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting you say that. A recent report from Gartner that I was looking at suggests that, based on one of their surveys, suggests that there are a whole series of expectations and, I guess, demands or skills that are required to do DEI well in an enterprise. The top two, clearly at the top, one is the ability to influence. So this is, cross-functional leadership, being able to work with people as opposed to people detesting you, right? So you've got to have that ability. And the second one is about change management, change creation.
Yeah.
And it makes me think for a second. I mean, I think you're bang on. The ability to create change incrementally versus at mass. I'm not saying we sit on either end, but let's, even if we're in the middle, requires people like you and many more people like you
Mm-hmm.
to be able to enter a global corporate setup, which is already politically engulfed and complex and has many other, issues with it that global organizations and CEOs and boards are trying to fix all the time. And DEI is one of them. It's definitely one of the top
Right.
issues, along with, the climate and various others. It will take many of us, won't it, for us to have these influencing skills, change skills, ability to listen, even if the other person's talking nonsense. I'm sure you've seen that many times, where you've just got to stay and, nod and take what someone is saying with to keep them on side, to try and get them to change their viewpoint and opinion and perspective.
So,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a good point. And that's when influence comes into play. That's when the relationship building, because one thing I never wanted to do was to be that person to have to say, hey, but change, please, for me, change your
Mhm.
perspective. I don't want to beg anyone. You want to have the same old perspective, that's on you. You'll reap those benefits,
Yeah.
whether they're good or bad, right? But for me, what I did strategically was I said, okay, I've developed a relationship with this individual. I know that this other individual that I tried to speak with, it's a bit challenging,
Mm.
breaking through, but I know they have a better relationship with this person that I broke through with. I will have them connect.
Mhm.
And so what I started to do was connect other people together that had
Right.
better relationships with each other to have these conversations and unpack. That's when the movement started to really take force within organizations that I worked for.
Yeah. Can you describe a moment or a situation, A, that was quite disturbing and painful for you on this journey, where you were like, what, you know, and B, which was the most inspiring and, like, joyful, elation, where you're like, come on,
Mm.
breakthrough.
Yeah, yeah. Goodness, I think there was a conversation. I'm not sure if you remember when this campaign came out. A little boy was on a campaign, H&M campaign, and I think H&M had used the phrase "cutest little monkey" or something to that. effect. And I remember when that came out, that was big news, right? Everyone was harping on that. And I was working with an organization, and one of the executives had pulled me into the office and said, Netta, can I just talk to you? I'm like, okay, sure. And it was almost as if he thought I was his therapist, right? He started to unpack how he has made statements like that. He didn't mean to say that. He didn't know how degrading that was, but how guilty he felt about it.
Mm.
And he said, now that this is something that's being talked about, he's like, I just feel like a hypocrite saying like, oh no, like, hold on, we have to, let's have a conversation about this, when he's like, I can't even really have a conversation about it because I feel so guilty that I actually have said that in my past. And he's like, I've never said this to anyone else. And I think that moment for me was like, what the heck? You don't know that that's not bad, right?
Mm.
And then at the same time, it was a powerful moment, because in that moment, what I realized was that I had created such a safe space that he felt, as an executive, you know, the need to share, unpack, and wanting to just do better and action on these things. Now I had him as, an ally right after that conversation, but it was him coming to me. It wasn't me going to him.
Right.
And that was really striking. And so I think I had several moments where I was just like, oh goodness, but you're an adult. You
Mm.
don't know that would be something that you wouldn't say. And then at the same time, in those moments, I would reflect and say, but wow, this person feels safe enough in this moment to share this with you because they want to do better. Right. And I think that was a striking moment. I think, the biggest moment for me was when and I know we'll get into this, but it's when I created Aerodei, without permission,
Right.
while I was an employee at an organization. And I had this burning feeling right when I had joined that organization, to the point I shared with one of the board members of that organization. They had hired me as VP of Global Inclusion. And I said, listen, I'm going to create an application
Mm-hmm.
on the platform of this organization that will be one of the biggest. I proclaimed that right when I had joined the company, and I did that with my direct reports. And so to see that come to life, and then to see the results of it, the organization that I worked for, because we were using this application that we built, helped to support us winning an $8 million RFP. Like, that was huge.
Wow. Yeah.
Now I had the power to say, okay, CEO, take a look at this. Like,
Mm.
because he's asking, how did we do this? But they're pointing out in the hearing that what sets us apart is our inclusion efforts within this organization.
Right.
That was one of the biggest moments for me, because not only did it lead to its own company now, Aerodei, that the CEO went ahead and even said, I have to invest in, because I see the
Right.
power of what this tool did for my
Right.
organization, but also having almost every single employee utilizing the platform, engaging with it, excited, right? Because when I ask a lot of friends and even peers, hey, tell me about an application you love going into at work. The answer is, Netta, we don't like going into any,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the same answer for me,
Right.
unless I have to go into it. So for me, it was
Absolutely.
always, well, how do I create something that people love going into? How do I create something that will allow people or employees to see how they impact the business through their inclusion efforts in real time?
Right.
How do I do that? And that happened, right? And so that was, I would say, a major, major moment.
Wow. Brilliant. I love the emotional journey that one would have gone through and you would have gone through from the
Yeah.
first conversation to, I guess, then at your previous corporate gig, doing something that was actually going to work. And now, of course, you probably said, screw this. I'm going to go bigger. I'm really going to create change, which gives us the segue into what you gave birth to, which is essentially Aerodei. Now, before I get to Aerodei, you wrote a book last year.
Yes.
Tell us about this book. Why did you write it? Why did you feel like you needed to write a book? And what's its purpose?
Yeah. For me, the inclusive organization, I really wanted to write this book because I had read so many DEI books and I was over it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Every DEI book kind of gave the a very high level overview, kind of you can find on Google, right?
yeah, yeah.
But excuse me.
It's okay.
But for me, I really wanted to make sure that this book was solution oriented. So after each chapter, there's an exercise at the end. That way, as a reader, readers are able to unpack the information based on the chapter that they just learned and
Mm,
reviewed.
mm,
They're able to also then tear out that page and say, okay, here's how we're going to implement these practices.
yeah.
Here are the steps that I took. Here's the self-reflection that I've done. The first chapter of my book is decoding human behavior. And that's where I add the element of behavioral psychology and all of that. But it's an element for, as a reader, for us to learn about ourselves. And every single exercise within that book I did as well, right? So this is for anyone, especially within an organization. But that, that was the key factor for me. It's
Mm,
how can I provide a real tool for folks to implement within their organization so it's not just another book that's so high level
mm,
with terms that we kind of all know of, but it's a book that will take you through the action-oriented points, will take you through a journey and a story, and will get you ignited to create that change because
mm,
you've implemented everything in the workbook,
mm,
the exercises at the end.
mm. And how many pages is this book? Do
Oh,
you know?
that's a good question. How many pages? I want to say I have the book right in front of me. There are, goodness, how many pages? This is a good question. About 200,
200 pages. Okay.
200 pages. Yeah,
Would you call it a book stroke playbook? Is it something that you can, you know, pick up and then put some post-it notes, maybe even write in it, God forbid. But I
absolutely.
do now. I write in the books I read because that's the way I immerse myself in the book.
Yeah, in fact, that's how I set it up. So
Right,
the exercises at the end, there are lines for folks to actually write in and prompts for
right.
folks to write in. So absolutely, it really guides the reader throughout for them to actually implement the type of change that they're looking for within their workplace.
And I haven't read the book yet, but I will, obviously. And I will ask for a signed copy somehow, and I'll
Okay.
get it to myself somehow. And I just want to push this a little bit further. So because of what you said, there's so many books being released, and with respect, many of the books do say good things.
Yeah,
It does get a bit trite though, and a bit stale, given
right.
there it's a hot topic and there's articles all over the world. There's a lot of thought leadership in this space. But I like the fact that your book now becomes a little bit more pragmatic. Do you
Yeah.
believe some of the recommendations you're making, or the frameworks you have, or the models you have, or the approaches, or the step by step guidance that you have, how sustainable are they, and how everlasting are they? Is this like, well, next year Netta won't be able to use this because it's out of date, or how have you done it?
Yeah. No, all of the things that I've implemented within this book
Yeah,
is definitely sustainable. They are things that I have been doing for years, right? So I wanted to make sure that any initiative that I have implemented in this book was
yeah,
tested and
yeah,
approved, and through experience. And they were all things that we could continue to do because they were things that I've done for years, and I've been able to view incremental shifts and change.
yeah,
So absolutely.
yeah. One of my observations, and I want to get your view on this, is that the model of capitalism and the model of industrialization of companies and scaling, this concept of scaling, right? When you're a small company, you're nice, micro, agile, and then you become big and you've got to put in systems and processes. And we get that. That's fine. One of the problems with that model is that and this has been going on for a good 5 decades, it's left behind the employee, the people who actually make the engine work, and given a lot of prominence to the customer for good reason, because I remember the quotes from my MBA days, the customer is king, customer's this, customer's that. Of course, because they pay your bills and they pay your salaries, that old school saying, right? And it was understood that if you work in a job where you're getting paid a salary, you've got a bonus. Like, what else do you want? What else do you want? Just do your job, do it well, and go home, right?
That's it.
And that culture has now evolved, thankfully, and changed. And now you have employee experience, customer experience, investor experience, total experience. Now we're having these brilliant conversations. But there's something that I find really weird, which brings me to what you do, which is so brilliant, which is the fact that I'm trying not to use, by the way, any lingo here. I'm trying to explain it in simple terms, right? So just in case a skeptic is watching this and saying, here we go with your frigging lingo and this is that and that is that and cultural appropriation and et cetera, et cetera. I'm trying not to use any of that. I'm just trying to speak as two human beings who are on a mission, okay? The employee has been forgotten in the global corporate organization. My needs have been forgotten. What I am has been forgotten, whether I enjoy playing sports, whether I celebrate a certain festival, whether I have a bunch of kids at home or I'm single, whether I am from a certain background, and so what the festivals that I celebrate, and so on and so forth. Okay, all been forgotten. Like, I'm just an entity. You're a woman, Netta, finance, AF, man, sales. I remember this in my corporate time, and that's fine. And because the understanding was that if I pay you really well and you're working hard, you're going to get promoted. What else do you want?
Right. What else?
Merit. What else do you want? And what they forgot was, whilst customers and their beliefs and their needs evolved, and they wanted more, they wanted better relationships, they wanted you to show consideration for the planet, for the community as a company, they forgot that employees also want some level of personalization, right? And this issue of self-identification is really quite interesting. And for those of you who don't know what that is, over to you now. What is, firstly, how do you react to my comment? And B, just walk us through what you're doing with self-identification, inclusivity. What does it really mean in simple terms? As opposed to just people think, well, you were always included as a black woman or a brown man or whatever you may be. It's because there are many skeptics. I want to move to the skeptics now because, gosh, I have many in my roster who believe DEI is a joke. A woke campaign, and it's reverse racism against white middle-class men. And I'm not arguing either point, but I just want to be as independent as possible and bring this to life. So a lot of things I'm throwing at you, but let's start first with personalization of the employee and understanding the needs of the employee.
Yeah, understanding the needs of the employee is critical, right? Times have shifted, and this is for all humans. We all know of what happened. There was a shutdown, a world shutdown. COVID came through, and that left many of us realizing how important our pieces, our families, maybe being alone, maybe not being alone, the things that we needed in life, right? And so times have shifted dramatically for any organization that is still thinking, oh, all we have to do is just give that person a nice fat paycheck. They'll be happy. Any other company can do that. So it's really about how are you setting yourself apart from the rest. And anyone that's in business would know there's always competition, right? And so if you want to think about, well, how do you bring on talented individuals within your organization that can actually propel it to the next level, then you want to think about, well, how do we make sure that we put people first so that they stay, so we can retain them and attract them? And so that's what I say there. In regards to skeptics, they will always be around, and they can stay around in their own box, which is fine. There's a lot of skeptics as it comes to, DEI. And what I say to that is, many of these people have not even touched this work, They don't even know it. So that's like me um getting advice from someone that getting advice about swimming that never swam in their life,
Right.
right?
Right.
Or has never been to an ocean, a beach, a pool, or anything, but they want to give me advice.
Hmm.
So I think as human beings, it's really important, especially if we're going to be naysayers, take a step back and ask yourself, well, have I even indulged in this work? Do I even know what it is? Have I sat down to really have a conversation with someone as to what does diversity, equity, and inclusion mean within the context of the workplace, not just in
Right.
general,
Right.
right? Have I even took a step back to ask my employees what this means to them, right? Let each employee define it. Have we even conducted a survey on their interest level and what they know about this?
Mm.
So I think there's just so many questions, and oftentimes what I find is naysayers just don't do their work, right?
Mm.
They hold on to maybe one story or something that they've seen, and that takes them to the left. But that's unfortunate because that's like saying, hey, jump off this bridge, you'll be fine. And you
Yeah.
jump off the bridge and you're not fine. So that's what I have to say about the naysayers.
Is it fair to say that, like you just say, they're always going to be naysayers? They're always going to be extremists on
Always.
both sides. They're extremists on both sides because there's definitely let's accept it. I mean, I certainly will say it, and then you can corroborate or disagree. That
Mhm.
there are characters out there that who have politicized DEI, and they're using it for their personal benefit and for whatever agenda they want to try and drive for a period of time. But there are many of us in DEI who've got the lived experiences, who understand that it's a very important movement. And we're like, my God, there is something happening. And is there injustice? So are people getting promoted that maybe shouldn't? Maybe, but wasn't that the case also when there was no DEI?
I mean, we can say that about that there's so many men in executive level positions that were mediocre that just got their roles through a relationship. I mean, like that's just life,
Yeah.
right? There are people, no matter what your background and your experience level is,
Yeah.
some people that they'll ride to the top just off of a relationship.
Yeah.
It happens, and they were mediocre and they didn't have the experience and they didn't have the education nor the background. And so I think even that argument is a bit dry, I would say. But yeah, I think, going back to it, naysayers will always be around. And I think that that's okay, right? Because what
Mm.
that allows for those of us that are really passionate, understand the inequities that exist for people and just humans in
Mm.
general, the barriers that exist and how hard life can be, and how that then impacts people's behavior within the workplace and how they contribute to progressing and propelling a workplace. Like those of us that want to take this on to support these efforts, like that's a hefty thing, right?
Mm. Mm.
That's a beautiful thing at the same time because we're it's beyond us. I think a lot of this work when we think about DEI, it's not this is for me. This is just for me. This is for millions of people,
Mm.
right? Like this is also for organizations to do well.
All right.
If people feel good, do you remember being, being at an organization and just loving? Like I remember the organizations that I absolutely loved
Hmm.
because they put me first. They
Right.
knew the things that I was experiencing, they could speak to that,
Hmm.
right? That's just a whole different experience. And that's what kept me at those organizations for so long.
One of the things when people ask me, what is DEI? What's the whole thing here? What's the campaign? And there's so many subgroups, the LGBTQ plus group. You've got race, you've got uh, neurodiverse folk, you've got people who've got, who are physically challenged, have disabilities. You've got people from multi-generation socioeconomic, differences. And the clusters can be built however you want. And DEI is all encompassing. I think, when people say, well, this race and LGBTQ and so on and so forth, it has to start with some sort of serious injustices first. I'm not saying that the other ones aren't, but race, gender, they are the hot ones, yes, because you've got a lot of women who are like, this is nonsense, man. This is not happening. 150 plus years for us to get some sort of equality, equal pay, and equal economic stature is rubbish. It's nonsense. Same thing with race. Race has been going on for a long time. It's not a new phenomena, right?
Yeah.
In every industry, you can speak to all the people who've suffered and endured, and the people who are non-diverse who have been campaigning in favor of it. White people have been campaigning in favor of racial equality. It's not just all the brown and black people have been doing it themselves.
Yeah.
So, but the other groups that follow are also what I would call cohorts of the DEI pack. And the way I look at DEI, if I look at it from a corporate standpoint, and I'm sure you'll agree, is DEI is not just about race and gender and all of the other groups. It is actually part of a much bigger problem, an old problem that Gallup and Harvard have been going on about for the, God knows, last 25 years, which is about employee disengagement. It's about employee disconnectedness. Employees saying, damn, shit, I don't like this job. It's crap, it's rubbish. And that number's gone from 80% to 70, 75. It's a very high percentage of people who don't like to go to work. Okay.
Right.
So the DEI contingent is a small contingent as part of that overall 70%. Would you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. When we really think about DEI is about how are humans being treated? And if we break down the humans, then what are the various demographics and populations of people what are they being treated like?
Right.
Why are they being treated that way? What are some of the historical connections to that? How does that then bring about barriers financially, mentally, right? So then we trickle it down. But yeah, really at a high level, it's how are humans being treated? Okay, all right, now let's break that down. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, you summed it up. I know you've got 1,000 things to do. I've had the most fantastic conversation. Of course, this 1 hour is not enough to discuss what we're discussing, but it's enough for the audience to hear you, your voice, the good work you're doing, the book you've written, and the company you've built. And tell us where people can find you, Netta.
Yes, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, Netta Jenkins. I would say LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. So message me, connect with me, let me know that you heard about me on Af's show, and we'll definitely be connected.
Amazing. Last 5 seconds. How did you find the experience today?
I loved it. Amazing. Excellent questions. It was as if we were having a cup of tea talking.
Yeah. Cup of tea is appropriate for London. So I'm going to see you when you come to London. I'm going to meet you when I come to the East Coast. And may the force be with you. Look after yourself, and we have your back. We have full support for your organization. Be well. Take care.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.